Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is June 1st, 2020. So today we have an open Q&A from Instagram and Facebook. I'm going to jump over to Instagram and see what we have. Let's see, scroll to the top here. All right, there we go. What are some protocols or changes to diet, supplementation, and lifestyle that you would do for people with harsh autoimmune issues like multiple sclerosis or psoriasis, for example? Well, there's a lot of autoimmune diseases. There's a ton of them, honestly. Some of them have more blatant causes than others. Some of them are kind of labeled as no known cause. It really just depends. But in general, autoimmune diseases have a large inflammatory component, so controlling inflammation is always going to be pretty important when it comes to autoimmune diseases. Anything, supplementation wise and nutrition wise and lifestyle wise, anything that controls inflammation is going to be good. So for these people, not overtraining, right? Not creating too much systemic inflammation by overtraining or overstressing. Using supplementation that might lower inflammation, like common ones would be like a good curcumin supplement, for example, a good bioavailable curcumin supplement. Using things like a good omega-3 supplement, perhaps. There are other ingredients that help control inflammation within the body. There are a lot of them, honestly, but anything in that realm is going to be good. Maybe some adaptogenic herbs, perhaps, to help with stress response, and a lot of them do have kind of an anti-inflammatory component. Also, making sure there are no vitamin or mineral deficiencies, sufficient antioxidants in the diet. I don't think you need to over supplement with antioxidants necessarily. That's kind of that idea was trendy for a while. I don't necessarily agree with that, but just making sure there's sufficient amounts of these things in the diet. Then also look at the particular autoimmune disease, and sometimes there are other connections to body systems that you might be able to control. So you said psoriasis, for example. Now that one's obviously a lot more common than multiple sclerosis, so we'll go with that one. But for psoriasis, a lot of the time people with psoriasis or similar skin issues, maybe eczema, have poor or have increased intestinal permeability. So quote unquote leaky gut, if you want to use that term. People can yell at me for using that, I don't really care. But a lot of them will have a digestive issue or digestive inflammation, and something that starts maybe, perhaps in the gut and gets its way into the blood and causes those issues. I do notice that a lot. So tracing it back and figuring out like what's the root of the irritation and inflammation is always a good policy. So that, and then anything else that anyone else is going to benefit from, sleep and stress, stress reduction and things like that. It's just going to be more important in these individuals because they're going to be more susceptible to flare-ups, right? A lot of these autoimmune diseases can go up and down and go away and come back and flare up. Try to figure out what the actual flare-up, what the causes are. A lot of them are just stress, right? Stress will cause a flare-up. So, keep that in mind. All right. Low dose insulin, 1 to 2 I use pre-cardio during a fat loss phase. Recall on an older podcast this topic was discussed. Wondered if you still see value in doing this. We may have discussed it. I don't know. Probably did, but I don't know that I necessarily see a lot of value in it. So I know where this comes from. So it comes from the idea of dropping blood glucose, right? And that way you're not utilizing glucose during the cardio session. Well, or some people like to use like injectable L-carnitine, and they want to use the exogenous insulin with it. Now, what I like to keep in mind here is a lot of the time when people are doing fasted cardio, it's normally not a lot of people doing fasted HIIT cardio. That could be the case, but let's assume that it's not. Let's assume that it's your steady state cardio. So, the problem is steady state cardio or lower intensity cardio isn't really very glucose intensive. So you're not really utilizing much glucose anyhow. So the idea of lowering blood glucose is kind of faulty in that it's not going to make a whole lot of difference from a mechanistic standpoint, right? The idea there is that you're burning off fatty acids or, free fatty acids floating around. If you're using other compounds in there like GH to release free fatty acids, then it's not really going to be useful to do this. And in fact, you're going to get more free fatty acid release in a lower insulin environment anyhow. So if that's the goal, then no. But this idea that, we know that this idea of fasted cardio being better than fed cardio is maybe not necessarily true. So, it really depends on the situation. The situations where you might be doing fasted cardio for benefit would be, like I said, using compounds that need to be taken in a low insulin environment. GH, yohimbine being two common ones. So if you're introducing insulin, probably not the best thing. And again, it's not glucose intensive cardio anyhow, so it probably really doesn't matter. So I would say no. So that's my answer. All right. Next one. What's the best training style, frequency, volume tier based on years in the gym for beginners, intermediates, and advanced lifters? I know as you become more advanced, things need to be adjusted to stimulate growth more than what a beginner would get from a simple 3 times 10 sets. Okay. Well, there's no way to really answer that because it's gonna just vary so much person to person. But some general things that we can say is, yes, a beginner is gonna get more out of less. A beginner will need less. Not only will they get more out of less, but they just need less in general to cause an adaptation, right? They don't need as much as an advanced lifter. Now, as much can mean a couple things. Are we talking as much volume, as much tension via more weight? So what are we talking about? The only real absolutes that we could say there is that the intermediate to advanced is going to probably need more than the beginner in some way, shape, or form, whether that's weight, weight, tension, volume, whatever. But beyond that, I can't sit here and say that they're going to need like X number of sets, because there's advanced lifters that do less volume that get results as well, and that's just because that they are increasing tension over time. And that's also because with that increased tension via progressively overloading and their ability to generate more intensity than a beginner, they're cutting into their recovery ability more, so they're actually perhaps doing less volume than a beginner. Is that good or bad? Just depends. They could do a higher volume program. They're probably going to have to back their intensity off and do more sub-maximal work. So the only thing we can really say is the advanced probably needs more than the beginner. That's really it. How they achieve that, whether it's via volume, tension, etc., really just depends on the person, preferences, and so on and so forth. So I know that's a really vague answer, but that's an extremely vague question. That's like asking what's the best training for every single type of person, and that's just not even answerable. So, but I hope that's helpful, at least a little bit. All right. Pasteurized egg whites, cooked versus uncooked. Any significant difference in bioavailability between the two? And I assume, wait a minute, let me see. I lost the question. Hang on a second. Let me go back. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. So differences in bioavailability. Yeah. So there is perhaps some difference. Now, does that necessarily mean that you can't utilize a uncooked pasteurized egg white product like you would get in a carton at the grocery store? Not necessarily. Every protein has a slightly different bioavailability. So the chicken that you eat, the beef that you eat versus the whey isolate that you drink versus, whatever, there is difference in bioavailability of these proteins, right? Now, I'm not strictly looking at a bioavailability scale and how I evaluate the proteins. Obviously, we want to use good bioavailable sources in general, but most animal sources are pretty good. Now, the way that you could look at this is from a digestive aspect. If you're absorbing the nutrients well, that's going to be step one. So if you drink uncooked egg whites and you get GI issues, like you feel like you get diarrhea or you have to go to the bathroom right after, I mean, I know people like that. You probably shouldn't drink them. You probably aren't absorbing them very well. They probably do not digest very well. And I tend to notice too, from an allergy standpoint, those, or from a food sensitivity standpoint, I guess you could say, those tend to be the thing to look out for versus eating like a whole egg that's cooked. I don't tend to notice as much issue with that as I would in like a pasteurized egg white drinking it, for example. So that's not to say no one's has an egg sensitivity. That obviously people do, but you get my point. So look at it as more of a digestibility thing and see how you digest it, see how you feel drinking it. And if you are okay with that, you're probably fine to consume that in moderation, right? Okay. 2 more. So, overwhelming thirst, especially at night. I drink over a gallon of water a day. Why? Why do you drink a gallon of water? I don't know. I don't know. Anywho, disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. This sounds like a medical issue. But the main reason that I would typically see this is blood sugar or dysfunction or irregular blood sugar, or spikes, peaks and valleys, whatever it might be. So the first thing I would be looking at personally is I'd be looking at my blood sugar, right? And if you look this up online, like if you were to go Google extreme thirst or unquenchable thirst or something like that, I'm sure you would probably see a lot of literature on diabetes and blood sugar issues. So that's what I would be looking for first. I would be looking at fasting blood glucose. I would be looking at postprandial blood glucose. I might even be looking at blood glucose like an hour post meal to see if I'm getting like a extreme spike, right? So, beyond that, I would talk to your doctor. I mean, honestly, and I would probably have labs done, make sure that there's no electrolyte issues that are potentially derived from like a kidney issue, perhaps. If you have extreme fatigue and you have an adrenal issue, there can potentially be an imbalance in aldosterone there, so you might get thirst from that. All right, so those are some things I'd be looking at. Probably at first, and then I'd probably talk to your doctor. I'd probably get some labs done. That's not normal. I would not ignore that. So check into those few things for sure. Okay, let's see. Last one. They ask, how about elevated SHBG in females? That's it. Well, okay. That's so a couple things. So SHBGs, obviously sex hormone binding globulin. It's a protein. it is going to bind to hormones. Now, it's not a bad thing. It's a regulatory mechanism, right? It's not a bad thing. We don't necessarily want no SHBG either. We need it in there for its regulatory function. However, there are some things that can cause it to go up or go down. First, age. Now, this can happen in men and women, but just generally in age, I tend to see it go up a little bit, and free hormones might go down some because of that. All right. There are other things that can cause it to go up, like elevated cortisol, certain birth control, thyroid dysfunction, liver issues. I'm trying to think of some other things. Certain medications, pregnancy. I'm just trying to think of like more common things that would cause that. Those are probably some of the more common ones. There probably are like some nuances and some very specific things in there, but I would probably, generally it's something either stress related or something off in the rest of the hormone feedback loop. And lab work's going to help tell you this. I would probably look at, if you have elevated SHBG, then you probably already had labs. So, you go back and look at those labs and look at the full hormone profile. Perhaps going to need some adrenal profile type lab work done just to see those values too. Also, just an evaluation from someone can kind of pinpoint those things, right? But it's probably something in that feedback loop somewhere. SHBG, being a regulatory hormone, doesn't really just rise or fall in isolation. That's not how it works. It's rising or falling in response to something because it's trying to regulate something, right? So, you're welcome to contact me. You can send me an email or a message or whatever, and I can definitely help do lots of consults on stuff like this. We can look over the labs and whatnot. If it's something that might need a medication or further intervention from a doctor, I can at least give you that information. You have to go to your doctor and chat with them, but we can definitely, look everything over and figure it out. So with that said, that is it for this week, guys. That is all the questions, and I really appreciate everyone's questions. So I will talk to you all next week.